The desert that shouldn't have thrived. What if the most advanced farming system in history was built over 5,000 years ago in the middle of the desert? Ancient Egypt is often remembered for its towering pyramids, golden sarcophagi, and mysterious gods. But behind the glory and grandeur lay something far less glamorous and far more powerful. A hidden force that didn't just sustain life, it controlled it. Agriculture wasn't just a way to survive in Egypt, it was a sacred system, precise, intelligent, and almost too perfect for its time. And at the heart of it all, a river that flooded like clockwork, carrying with it both life and mystery. The Nile, vein of the gods. The Nile wasn't just a river, it was everything. Imagine living in a world where the difference between feast and famine came down to whether the river swelled or didn't. Each year, like clockwork, the Nile would flood. It spilled over its banks, coating the fields with a layer of rich, black silt. The Egyptians didn't consider this natural, they considered it divine. The river wasn't just a source of water, it was the vein of the gods. What's even more shocking, the floods happened at the perfect time, just as the farming season began. Coincidence or something more? The Nilometer, Egypt's ancient flood. Sensor buried in temple ruins and carved into stone, the Nilometer looks like a glorified measuring stick. But don't be fooled. This ancient device could do what even today's tech struggles with: predict the future. The Nilometer measured the Nile's flood levels. A few inches too low, famine. Too high, ruin. But when it hit the sweet spot, Egypt thrived. Here's the twist. Historians still aren't sure how accurate these readings were, or how they knew what to expect. Some claim it's evidence of advanced hydrology. Others whisper theories of lost knowledge or guidance from the stars. Either way, the Nilometer wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon of control. Shadoof, the genius of simplicity. You'd think desert agriculture required massive machinery or impossible engineering. Instead, Egyptians used something breathtakingly simple: the shadoof, a wooden beam, a counterweight, and a bucket. That's it. But this humble device let farmers lift water from canals into dry fields, fast, efficiently, and with almost no effort. Even today, some rural communities in Egypt and Sudan still use it. It didn't just survive history, it defied it. Some researchers believe the shadoof was invented centuries earlier than mainstream scholars claim. If that's true, then Egypt's farmers may have been among the earliest true engineers, and we've been underestimating them for millennia. What they grew, and why it mattered to the ancient Egyptians, food wasn't just survival, it was identity. Their entire society, from temples to tombs, revolved around what they could grow. They cultivated wheat and barley, the lifeblood of their diet. Bread and beer weren't just daily staples, they were sacred. These foods fed pharaohs and peasants alike. But it didn't stop there. They also grew flax, used to weave linen, the fabric that dressed both the living and the dead, and papyrus, harvested from marshy edges of the Nile, gave the world one of its first forms of paper. Agriculture wasn't just about eating, it created everything: clothes, scrolls, trade goods, offerings to the gods. In a way, the soil of Egypt wrote its history as much as any scribe ever did. Farm work or forced labor? Who actually worked the fields? Most sources say peasants, but what does that really mean? Egyptian art often shows smiling farmers under a warm sun, but the truth might be darker. Many of these laborers were tied to the land, their work demanded as part of their tax burden, and during harvest season, teams of officials monitored every bushel. Recent archaeological discoveries suggest that while not technically slaves, many farmers lived under strict quotas, and failure to meet them led to punishment, or worse. There are even scrolls that record beatings, seizures of property, and forced conscription into state projects like canals and temples. So were they workers? Or were they prisoners of a golden empire? The calendar that followed the flood. Egypt didn't follow a calendar based on the moon or sun. They followed the Nile. Their year was divided into 3 seasons, each aligned with the river. Akhet, inundation. The flood season. Fields were underwater, but everyone watched the river with reverence and fear. Pere, emergence. As the water receded, planting began. The soil was soft and ready, a divine reset. Shemu, harvest. Crops were gathered, counted, taxed. This was the most profitable and most tense time of the year. What's eerie is how well this matched their mythology. The god Osiris, symbol of death and rebirth, was believed to control the floods. When the Nile rose, it meant Osiris had returned. When the waters vanished, his spirit had retreated. Their entire calendar wasn't just agricultural, it was spiritual. Taxation and total control. Imagine working your land for months and then giving most of it away. In ancient Egypt, taxes weren't optional. The pharaoh's scribes kept meticulous records down to the last seed. Farmers owed a share of their produce to the state, and failure wasn't taken lightly. They didn't pay in coins or gold, they paid in grain. This grain went into massive state silos and was used to feed soldiers, pay officials, and trade with neighboring kingdoms. It was a system so detailed, some scholars say it rivals modern bureaucracy. And here's the chilling part. Many historians believe these records helped the empire last for over 3,000 years, longer than any nation has survived since. Was Egypt an ancient technocracy? Here's where the story takes a turn. What if Egypt's success wasn't just about gods or geography, but data? Some modern theorists believe the pharaohs operated the world's first centralized planning system. The Nile's flood patterns, crop cycles, labor allocations, and food storage were all tracked by armies of scribes. They argue that Egypt's agricultural system wasn't just spiritual, it was scientific, a form of early technocracy powered by observation, prediction, and control. It wasn't just a kingdom of kings, it was a kingdom of calculations. Food for the afterlife. To the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't an end, it was a continuation, a journey that required provisions. Just like life, inside tombs, archaeologists have found loaves of bread, jars of beer, baskets of onions, and bundles of wheat carefully preserved for eternity. These weren't just offerings, they were insurance, meant to nourish the soul in the afterlife. Even the tombs of middle-class Egyptians held miniature models of farms, tiny plows, granaries, and workers frozen in time. In their belief system, the afterlife was not a cloud-filled paradise, but a fertile mirror of earth. Fields would still need plowing, grain would still need harvesting, so the tools of survival were buried with the dead, a silent reminder that the farmer's work never truly ended. Women in the fields. While most depictions of ancient Egypt spotlight pharaohs, priests, and warriors, the truth on the ground was different. In the fields, women played a vital and often overlooked anteater role. They sowed seeds, harvested flax, carried water, and managed food storage. Artwork from the Middle Kingdom shows women balancing baskets on their heads and weaving linen from freshly cut plants. Some even held administrative roles, managing granaries and labor. One title stands out across multiple inscriptions: Mistress of the Granary. This wasn't a poetic phrase. It denoted responsibility, leadership, and power. Egyptian agriculture was not just male-driven, it was upheld by both hands, and history has only remembered half the story. The temple granaries. Temples in Egypt weren't just houses of worship, they were economic powerhouses. These massive institutions owned land, collected grain, and stored food in sprawling granaries. In times of famine, they often became lifelines for communities. But this charity came with influence. Priests who controlled the grain also controlled political leverage. Some temples even had private irrigation systems, diverting water to their fields before others. They didn't just pray for rain, they engineered it. The line between religious authority and agricultural supremacy blurred. The granary wasn't just a storage room, it was a symbol of spiritual and social control, and possibly the reason some priesthoods gained enough power to challenge the pharaohs themselves. Drought, famine, and collapse. No system, no matter how divine, is invincible. Inscriptions from Egypt's first intermediate period tell stories of grain shortages, civil unrest, and death by starvation. Entire regions were abandoned, bodies were buried without ceremony. And what triggered it all? The river, the Nile, didn't rise. Some scholars believe these dry years were caused by volcanic eruptions half a world away, disrupting global weather. Others blame political mismanagement or internal corruption, but the result was the same. Without water, Egypt cracked. It wasn't invaders or rebels that nearly ended the empire. It was nature, and the overdependence on one sacred, silent force. Modern echoes. Thousands of years later, the Nile still flows, and farmers still till the same soil. The challenges have changed. Egypt now faces overpopulation, dam disputes, and climate volatility. The once reliable floods have been replaced by engineered irrigation, and the wisdom of the past often goes ignored. Some experts warn that ancient Egypt's downfall holds warnings for today. Their collapse began when nature shifted, and centralized systems couldn't adapt fast enough. In a strange, full-circle moment, we're facing the same questions. Can civilization survive when its food systems fail? And what lessons lie buried beneath the sand? Animal agricultures and symbolism. Ancient Egyptian agriculture wasn't just about plants. Animals played a central role, both on the farm and in the spiritual realm. Cattle were sacred, not just a food source, but a status symbol. The size of your herd could define your place in society. Oxen plowed the fields, goats and sheep provided milk, and ducks were herded through irrigation canals, a clever method to fatten them before feasting days. But some animals crossed into divinity. The Apis bull was worshipped as a living god, a manifestation of Ptah, the creator. It lived in a royal stall, was fed by priests, and upon death received an elaborate burial. To ancient Egyptians, the farm was not just a workplace, it was a cosmic ecosystem where every creature had a purpose beyond survival. Farming and magic Egyptian farmers didn't rely on tools alone. They turned to something older and perhaps more powerful: magic. Before planting, fields were often blessed with spells and protective amulets. Some buried small idols beneath the soil, asking the gods to drive out pests and disease. Special incantations were recited during planting and harvesting. Even simple tasks like weeding were done under spiritual guidance. Two deities ruled these rituals: Renenutet, goddess of harvest, and Hapi, god of the Nile's flood. Farmers built tiny shrines in their honor, not out of superstition, but out of necessity. If the gods weren't pleased, the land would suffer. In ancient Egypt, farming wasn't science versus superstition. It was both, in perfect balance. Flood prediction and the stars. Every Egyptian depended on one question: when will the Nile rise? There were no weather apps, no rain forecasts, just observation and faith. One clue lay above, not below: the heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. When Sirius reappeared just before dawn, Egyptians knew the flood was coming. This celestial signal was so reliable that it shaped their calendar, their festivals, and even their religious cycles. It's one of the oldest examples of astronomy being used for agriculture, and it wasn't just practical, it was sacred. The stars weren't distant lights to them, they were messengers, announcing the return of life. Agricultural education. In a world without schools, how did Egyptians learn to farm? Through oral tradition and apprenticeship. Sons learned from fathers, daughters from mothers. Knowledge passed hand to hand, techniques refined across centuries. But it wasn't all spoken. Wealthier families sometimes kept papyrus manuals with notes on irrigation, crop rotation, and pest control. Temples also played a role, training scribes in agricultural records and land management. The result? A society where farmers weren't just laborers. They were masters of timing, climate, and soil, a living archive of expertise passed through generations. Final reflection. Destiny in the dirt. The Egyptians didn't just survive the desert, they reprogrammed it. They listened to the river, they read the stars. They treated every field like a temple, every harvest like a resurrection. And beneath all the gold and stone, the true foundation of their empire was soft, black, fertile earth, shaped by water, blessed by magic, and harvested by hands who understood that farming was not just survival, it was destiny. So as modern civilization faces its own agricultural reckoning, maybe it's time we stopped looking up at the pyramids and started digging where it all began: the soil. What if the floods had stopped? Forever, the entire Egyptian agricultural system hung by a thread called the Nile. For thousands of years, it flooded like clockwork, but ancient records mention strange years of low water, failing crops, and hunger. Could the river have stopped permanently? Modern science offers a chilling answer. Volcanic eruptions in faraway lands can disrupt global weather, changing rainfall across Africa. Some Egyptologists believe this triggered the megadroughts behind Egypt's most catastrophic collapses. If the floods had stayed gone, even for a few more years, the golden age of the pharaohs might have ended before the pyramids were ever built. What if Egypt didn't invent agriculture, but inherited it? For generations, we've been told that Egypt was one of the cradles of agriculture. But what if that's only half true? Some scholars are starting to notice something strange. Egypt's early irrigation techniques, farming calendars, and granary systems bear uncanny similarities to those in Mesopotamia, and in some cases even predate them. Could they have come from a shared, lost civilization? One that predates both empires and passed its knowledge down through oral tradition or forgotten trade routes? It's just a theory, but if true, it would mean that Egypt's rise wasn't the beginning of something, but the continuation of something even older? What if we're repeating their mistakes? Today, the world faces rising temperatures, vanishing rivers, and exhausted soil. And like the Egyptians, we've become reliant on a few fragile systems to feed billions. Ancient Egypt collapsed when its environment shifted and its leaders failed to adapt. Now ask yourself, are we doing the same? We drain aquifers, we clear forests, we build over farmland and fight over water. The story of ancient Egypt is not just history, it's a mirror showing us what happens when civilization grows too comfortable with control and forgets how dependent it truly is on the earth beneath it. A message buried in the earth. We often picture Egypt as a kingdom of kings, of monuments, magic, and myth, but that's not what made it last 3,000 years. What truly built Egypt was something humbler, something quieter. It was the silt left behind by the Nile. The seeds passed from one calloused hand to another. The rhythm of planting, praying, and waiting. It wasn't the pyramids that fed a nation, it was the soil. And if we want to understand the rise and fall of empires, we should stop reading their stories in stone and start reading them in the dirt.